The Red Duke is one of the most enigmatic characters in the Vampire Counts roster, and this is for a lot of reasons. He was never actually fleshed out in the Vampire Counts army books of 6th, 7th, and 8th editions. He actually has a Warhammer supplement from 5th edition, Circle of Blood, that brings him kind of into the lore as a whole. And shortly after that, a book by C.L. Werner called, well, The Red Duke, that actually goes into and retcons some of the original lore of the Red Duke and solidifies his story. So today we're going to talk about the Red Duke, the Scourge of Aquitaine, El-Syf, the Northern Sword, and his whole crusade through Araby. And that's where everything kind of starts here. We're going to start in that Grand Crusade, and we know the Great Crusade as being this motion where Jafar, this Arabian sultan, kind of leads a massive invasion into Tilia and Astalia. And as a result, the Empire and Bretonnia launch Crusader legions I guess you could say, but Crusader armies to go and assist the beleaguered human bros. So down in Tilia and Astalia, you have these Bretonnian errantry wars, I guess they're what they're typically called, but it is a crusade nonetheless, of questing knights, of Grail knights, of knights of the realm, and knights errant. And of that is the Duke of Aquitaine himself, the Red Duke. Now, he is not called the Red Duke until he becomes a vampire, but for the sake of continuity, I'm just going to call him the Red Duke because it's just easier for all of us to identify. So, the Red Duke is actually the older brother of King Louis the Righteous, who is the current king of Bretonnia. So, he already is kind of this main champion of Bretonnia. He's the right hand of the king himself. And in a lot of ways, he is the ultimate ideal of what chivalry really is. He is a very prodigious Grail Knight on top of being a Duke of Aquitaine. So he has quite a lot going for him. And he leads multiple charges, multiple sieges, vanguards, all these great heroic acts throughout the entirety of the crusade. But during the tail end of the crusade, when things are really kind of starting to wrap up, the Duke goes missing during the siege of Lachish, or something like that, Laksehisch. And during that time, everyone's like, oh, well, where the hell is he? In the old supplement, it just says that he comes back, but in C.L. Werner's book, he is witnessed by Abhorash. Red Duke is surrounded by a lot of Arabian knights who go to kill him, and he slaughters them to a man, but in the meantime, takes a mortal wound, and so he sits there kind of dying, bleeding out in the sand, and Abhorash approaches him and says, listen, I like what you've done. I like your handiwork. And this is sidebar here real quick. This is kind of a motif of Abhorash. He kind of travels the world looking for people of great martial prowess, of honor, of valor, and he converts them to vampirism pretty much on their quote-unquote deathbed as they're kind of dying. He doesn't go and make these people unless he's kind of really has his heart set on it. No pun intended, because he's a vampire. So he tells the Red Duke, if you want to stay alive, I can turn you to a vampire. And the Red Duke obliges, and it doesn't really talk about if he's fully aware of what's going to happen to him, but the Red Duke returns to the Bretonnians, very ill, very much on his deathbed, basically, and the Bretonnians take him and retreat back to Bretonnia, back to Aquitaine, or at least his knights do. And doing this, and remember, this is the very end of the crusade, so they're not like they're abandoning the crusade here. Things are pretty much wrapped up. So by doing this, they fight through hordes of Skaven, greenskins, everything to get the Duke back to Aquitaine. And when they get him back there, he eventually kind of succumbs to his wounds and passes away. And he lies dormant, or I guess resting, in his tomb for 3 days. And during this time, it's kind of a very dark time in Bretonnia, especially Aquitaine. This is, again, the king's right hand, this champion of Bretonnia, is now dead. And at the same time, the Duke of Aquitaine is dead. So all of his knights kind of make this kind of solemn vow on the tomb, on the grave of the Red Duke, kind of saying, I will always fight for Aquitaine, I will do as you bid, what you wanted, that kind of damning oath. Because eventually, 3 days later, like we were saying, the Duke comes back to life as the vampire knight himself, the Red Duke. And here he gets the title of Red Duke because he goes on a slaughtering spree, and it completely turns his armor red. And he gets that this is where this title kind of emanates from, this terrifying vampire lord. All of his hair is gone, he looks like Pitbull, and he's just ravaging through the lands. And as he does this, he's raising all of his knights back again to fight for him. And one of his knights, who is actually named Lord Falk of Castle Ressus, becomes the Dark Knight. Now this is in the pre-retconned lore. The reason I'm bringing that up now is because it's just kind of important. It's essentially, the Dark Knight is this vampire that serves the Red Duke, and in the pre-novel, in the pre-Red Duke novel lore, he serves him, and then eventually he just gets killed. So very unceremonious, but I wanted to bring him up because I know someone probably would have said, hey, well, you didn't talk about Lord Falk. He's in the Circle of Blood expansion. Well, he's not in C.L. Warner's book, so just talking about him real quick. Sir Corbinian, though, is the man who really becomes the chief lieutenant of the Red Duke's army. He is this basically this refugee from Mousillon, as we all know too well, and he basically becomes the right hand of the Red Duke after he basically betrays the Red Duke. You see, when the Red Duke kind of comes to becoming a vampire, he goes through the entire land and just the Scourge of Aquitaine is where he gets this title. He's just killing everything left and right. He raises this massive army of undead, and everyone kind of meets for this grand battle at the Battle of Sarin Fields. King Louis is there to fight his brother and to essentially kill his older brother again. And he at the same time is so bemoaned by this. He's so upset by this because he's very close to his brother, and this guy was an icon of Bretonia. At the same time, though, King Louis is a Grail Knight. He does have to uphold the tenets of Bretonia. And they get in this titanic duel, and eventually the Grail Knight, the Duke, the Red Duke himself, is beaten by King Louis. And King Louis can't really see this he can't really put his own brother down. So what he does is he actually seals his brother in a tomb, locking him away for many, 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 many years. And before this battle, though, Sir Corbinian is discovered by the Red Duke as basically being like a double agent, because the Red Duke's like, hey, you watch over my castle. And when that happens, Corbinian is basically trying to make it so that the castle can actually be overrun. And the Red Duke discovers this and kills Corbinian. This is important, trust me. So the Red Duke lies in this tomb for 1,000 some years, and he's going mad. He's trying to break out of the tomb, and he can't because it's got blessings of the lady on it to kind of seal the tomb shut for ad nauseum eternity. And eventually, though, as all things do in the Warhammer world, this cult, it could either be a demon cult or an undead cult, anything in the Warhammer world, but in this case, it's a cult of like necromancers and witches, basically break the seals of the Red Duke's tomb. He kind of flies out of it and kills all the cult members and goes to reenact the same battle of Sarin Field. And he does this by raising every single knight yet again, and raising Sir Corbinian, and this time as his right-hand lieutenant in a way that he knows he will not defy him. So Sir Corbinian has come back as his chief lieutenant, and he goes about this huge crusade through Bretonia. And he comes to this town, and it's called the village of Mersal. And in Mersal is a chapel of Serene. There, a very enterprising man named Sir Marulf is defending the city, the village. And Sir Marulf has this title, the Holy Knight. He's this questing knight that is, again, a very great paragon of chivalry. Every named knight in Bretonia is the paragon of chivalry. You guys should know this by now. But the Red Duke kind of notices this, and he goes to kill him quickly because okay, this guy's going to be a kind of a linchpin for the leadership of the Bretonian village of Mersal. And when he kills him, he kind of realizes this guy is actually very valorous. He has a lot of martial prowess. I want him on my team. Very Abhorrash-like. So he converts him to vampirism, and the Holy Knight becomes the Dark Knight. And this is a really, really cool kind of moment in the lore, because it looks nothing like Batman, but it's just kind of cool to see that motif of the Dark Knight. The Dark Knight actually comes back in End Times with Malbod during that whole big final civil war, but this is where the origin of the Dark Knight is, and a lot of people will remember this from the book by C.L. Warner if you did read it. So essentially, the Red Duke with his two bros, Sir Corbinian and the Dark Knight, go to take over all of Bretonia. I mean, he knows that Sir Gilon, or Gilon, Gilon, is the new Duke of Aquitaine, and he keeps hearing about this Sir Galland, who was this Grail Knight that was alive right after the Red Duke's time, and was taught by King Louis himself, And basically this knight is a hero of all of Bretonnia. So the Red Duke goes to kind of desecrate his tomb and kind of destroy everything that Galen stands for and Gillen stands for. And Gillen is again seen as a usurper to the Red Duke, because this is the new Duke of Aquitaine. He is the only Duke of Aquitaine that matters. So a grand kind of battle breaks out outside of the tomb of Galland himself, the Grail Knight Galland. And this is where the Red Duke kind of has this titanic battle where he's fighting off against Gillan, and he's trying to get inside of this tomb. While doing it, though, he kills Gillan, and Gillan subsequently had just killed Sir Corbinian. So there's that kind of Dutch door killing action that goes on here, and the Red Duke and the Dark Knight make their way into the tomb of Sir Galland, and here they are. They're going to just destroy and desecrate this entire tomb. And there's this other knight, Sir Luther, who gets in a duel with the Dark Knight and just barely wins. And you have Red Duke here at the last pinnacle moment, ready to put an end to everything. And this prophetess kind of looks him in the eyes and says, "Listen, I know what you want to do, but it's all for naught. Because Galland is your son, and Gillan is a descendant of you." And this kind of breaks the Red Duke almost immediately. See, what happened was Louis the Righteous didn't want his brother's name to kind of fall to the wayside. He didn't want it to be this kind of bad name in the mouth of everyone. He didn't want it to be kind of recognized like that. So what he did was he took his son, and the son was kept away from the Red Duke. He was not aware of his birth. And he raised him to become this very virtuous, very valorous knight, a good and noble knight. And eventually Galland, through his many deeds and whatnot, encountered the lady and became this Grail Knight. And at the same time, he ruled over Aquitaine, just like his father once did, just like his descendant now did, or dead now. And he was known far and wide as this very big hero of Bretonnia. So Louis kind of passed away knowing that his brother's name was intact, and his name as well was, well, all well and good. So with this kind of knowledge, it just breaks the Red Duke, who runs out of the tomb screaming, and he's just killed his descendant. He went to just go desecrate his son's tomb, and it kind of creates this weird duality to this lord, because you see him as this very vicious, barbaric, let's just say savage vampire lord who just kills his way through Bretonnia. Especially on his second incarnation, he's there to just put the hurt on everything. And you see this immediate kind of turn on him as soon as he realizes that he's done the worst possible thing he can possibly do. He's destroyed his own legacy, which is what he was trying to kind of solidify to begin with. There's a lot of deep tragedy to the Red Duke that I don't think that Total War Warhammer 2 really goes into. I mean, we have the ability El-Syf, which is kind of cool, the Northern Sword, but we don't really get that kind of visceral, depressing history and story of him that really exists. I mean, the Blood Dragon vampires, for the most part, are all really cool big badasses, but they all kind of have their own really cool tragedy to them. You could argue that Luther Harkin is in some way a Blood Dragon vampire because he's of the Harkin bloodline, and Wallach Harkin is a Blood Dragon vampire. But each and every one of these Blood Dragon vampires is got some sort of like backstory. We're like, oh, that's some shit. In the end times, though, and we've kind of talked about this, but I'll just kind of do it for the sake of keeping everything intact. Duke Jared, the kind of last leader of the Bretonnian contingent of knights during the Council of Incarnates, goes to leave the council to go ally up with Gilles le Breton, because Vlad von Karstein says, hey, Gilles and Abhorash are fighting at the last abbey with the last of the Grail Knights in the last battle. Go do some last shit. And Jared is escorted to Gilles and to Abhorash by the Red Duke himself. So he's acts as kind of this guide on over to him. But that kind of sums up our grand lore of the Red Duke himself. The Duke in the army book actually has two weapons, or two items. He's got the Blade of Leaping Gold, which is actually this sword that was taken by Emir of Araby, and this is a guy he kills in single combat. No other ceremony, or there's not much description outside of that. And on top of it, he's got the armor of blood, which is, again, this is what gives him his namesake, the Red Duke. It's just covered in crimson and gore, and it's stained with the lives of many, I almost said British peasants, Bretonian peasants, Bretonian peasants, knights, everything. So these are these two kind of abilities. And if you were to see these translated into Total War Warhammer, the Blade of Leaping Gold becomes a generic magic item, and it allows him to make 1 attack into 3 attacks. So how would I see this kind of interpreted? I would see maybe as increasing his melee attacks, so the ability for him to hit, or maybe even having like a blast ability. I'm not really even sure. I think that it's such an old entry in the Warhammer like grand lore that it needs a refresh, and that if Creative Assembly were to add the Red Duke as a legendary lord, I think that they would have to make some weapons and items that are a little more custom. The Armor of Blood is super like nondescript, so you can go anywhere with that. And maybe it's a ward save, and it gives him regenerative abilities, and it causes terror because, you know, it's got the blood of all these different stations, from peasant all the way up to Duke, covered all over it. And I think that would be kind of cool, right? This kind of armor that incarnates what the Red Duke is really about. But the Blade of Leaping Gold, not the most Red Duke sounding weapon. So hopefully if they do put him in the game as an actual campaign lord, we can see a little bit more flesh out on his items and abilities. But thank you guys so much for joining us here today. We have plenty of videos coming out here this week. Trying to kind of stick with this spooky theme. We're going to have some stuff on Manon, you know, the sea god, Stromfels, another one of the gods of the deep, the shark god, actually. We'll talk about maybe some of the vampire bloodlines in a little bit more depth. But just kind of keep things in October. We got, what 16 more days of October, 17 more days of October. Let's try to keep it on that spooky theme. We'll talk about some scary stuff as we go through the lore. But as always, guys, thanks so much for watching here today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment below, all that kind of cool action. But have a good one, and take care.